On May 15, 2016, at 9 a.m., 23-year-old geology graduate student Annabelle Clark arrived at the south rim of the Grand Canyon. She planned a short one-day hike along the South Kaibab Trail, which is considered one of the most popular but also one of the most dangerous due to the sharp change in altitude and the hot air rising from the canyon ledges. According to her supervisor at Northern Arizona University, Annabelle knew this route well, had hiked it before, and always followed safety rules. At 10:40 a.m., she called her best friend, Melanie James. According to Melanie, the call was short, about a minute, and Annabelle said she had already started her descent and wanted to make it back before the heat set in. Cell phone records confirmed that the phone signal was detected near the trailhead about a mile above the Colorado River. After that, the device was no longer connected to the network. Her car, a white sedan, was found in the official parking lot near the trailhead. It was locked, and inside were sunglasses, a bottle of water, and a small backpack that she usually left in the car on short trips. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle inside. A forest ranger patrol that checked the parking lot around 7 p.m. noted that the car was in the same place as in the morning and did not appear to be abandoned. This entry was made in the logbook. On May 16th, when Annabelle failed to contact her friend and did not show up for her morning meeting at the university, her teachers reported this to the Flagstaff Police Department. At 9:30 a.m., park rangers began their initial search of the trail behind the reconstruction site. They covered the main section of the route to Ojos Point, checked the lookout points and usual rest areas, but found no belongings, clothing, or shoe prints that could be definitively identified as hers. That same afternoon, a canine team from Tucson was called in. The dogs picked up her scent from the car and were able to follow it confidently for only the first few hundred yards from the trailhead. Further on, the trail was lost on steep sections where the hard, dusty soil did not retain footprints. Rangers noted in their report that gusts of wind from the canyon made the dogs' work difficult and may have completely blown away the scent. The search teams worked until sunset, dividing themselves into sectors. One team searched the side trails, another searched the areas near the ledges, where tourists sometimes stopped to take pictures, and a third searched several shallow hollows, where people sometimes hide from the heat. According to the head of the operation, the conditions were difficult. The temperature rose above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and visibility at the bottom of the trail was reduced by hazy dust rising from the bottom of the canyon. On May 17th, the search was expanded. Volunteers and 2 additional canine teams were brought in, and a Park Service helicopter was also deployed. Dashcam footage shows that the search was conducted at an altitude of about a mile above the canyon, but thick shadows from the rocky ledges made it difficult to spot people, even in open areas of the route. The report for that day noted several false leads: a trace of a red backpack belonging to another tourist, a piece of fabric that turned out to be part of a blanket, lost several months earlier, and shoe prints that did not match the model used by Annabelle. Each find was checked separately, and none of them led the searchers even to the approximate trajectory of the missing person. On the evening of May 17th, the police officially classified the incident as a disappearance under unexplained circumstances. The documents state that there were no landslides, rockfalls, or signs of wild animal attacks along the route. There were also no witnesses who saw Annabelle after she started her descent on the South Kaibab Trail. The search continued for several more days, but with each passing hour, the chance of finding even a clue to her route diminished. The trail she had taken on the morning of May 15th was accustomed to human footsteps, but this time it left no answers. On May 17, 2018, at around 11 a.m., National Park Service Ranger Jordan Ellis was conducting a routine patrol of a remote section of the north rim of the Grand Canyon. This area is rarely visited by tourists. There are no viewing platforms, roads, or even simple trails. According to Ellis, he was walking along a narrow natural passageway where rocks crumble every spring when he heard a quiet, uneven sound, like a faint moan. At first, he thought it was an injured animal. Only when he approached the crevice did he see a thin strip of light falling into a small cave. In his official report, he described the moment that became a turning point. Shining his flashlight, he saw a figure sitting on the floor, leaning against a cold wall. The woman was extremely thin, her hair was tangled, and her skin was covered with spots of exhaustion. Her eyes did not react to the light, but she was alive. The forester noted that her lips were moving, but he could not make out the words. She was just clutching a piece of dirty cloth in her hands. At 11:30 a.m., the rescue service log recorded that Ellis had reported finding a woman in critical condition. 20 minutes later, the first group of rangers was already on their way to the coordinates that the forester had given over the phone. Geographically, this area is located a few miles from the nearest official trail, in a place that is inaccessible to both horses and vehicles. Rescuers described in their reports that the cave was extremely narrow, the temperature inside remained low, and the floor was covered with fine sand and rock debris. The woman was carried out on a special stretcher. She did not resist, but she could not move on her own. One of the medics noted that her breathing was shallow and her pulse was barely detectable. Only when the woman was carried to an open area were the rangers able to see her face. One of them recognized her from old reports. It was Annabelle Clark, a geologist from Flagstaff who had disappeared in May 2016. Her photo had been hanging in the Northern Territory's Missing Persons Center for 2 years. At 11:50 a.m., an air ambulance was called. The pilot noted in the log that the flight was carried out immediately due to the extremely serious condition of the patient. To lift the stretcher, the helicopter hovered over the canyon ledge for almost 10 minutes, a maneuver that experienced pilots consider risky. At 12:40 p.m., Annabelle was taken to a hospital in Flagstaff. The emergency room report noted severe exhaustion, dehydration, signs of prolonged exposure to cold, numerous bruises and abrasions on the arms and legs. Doctors noted that the woman's condition corresponded to several months, not days or weeks, of isolation. She barely responded to voices and movements around her, sometimes trying to say something, but the sounds were meaningless. The news that the missing graduate student had been found alive spread very quickly among the medical staff. According to the emergency room nurse, a call came in around 2 p.m. from Melanie James, a friend of Annabelle's. She said she was one of the first to learn of the rescue. Melanie arrived at the hospital within an hour of the call. The doctors noted in their records that she cried constantly and seemed genuinely upset. In the hallway, she repeated several times that she hadn't lost hope and always believed that she would be found. The staff recorded that Melanie had to wait almost an hour before she was allowed into the ward. According to protocol, access was only permitted after Annabelle's condition had stabilized. According to the nurse who accompanied Melanie, the woman entered the ward quietly, stood nearby for a few minutes holding Annabelle's hand, and said almost nothing. Doctors later noted that the patient did not recognize visitors and responded only to strong external stimuli, loud noises, or light. In the doctor's opinion, the woman found in the cave was in a state of so-called defensive amnesia, when the psyche distances itself from what has been experienced. The trauma doctor noted in the report, "We are dealing with deep psychological trauma. The patient behaves as if she had been in complete isolation for a long time." Investigators would later refer to this note. In the evening of the same day, detectives from the Park Service arrived at the hospital. They sought to record her initial testimony, but the doctors categorically refused to allow this due to the woman's condition. In their reports, the detectives noted that the patient was unable to answer even simple questions, did not understand the context, and could not give her own name. 2 nurses remained with her at all times. Towards nightfall, doctors noticed the first signs of improvement. Annabelle stopped clutching the piece of cloth she had been holding since her rescue and began to respond to movement near her bed. She raised her head several times, trying to orient herself in space. These attempts were brief and immediately ended with her gaze wandering to the ceiling. Neither the doctors nor the rescuers received any explanation that day as to how she ended up in a cave on the northern edge. All official documents stated only one thing: the woman was found alive after 2 years of disappearance. And no camera, no witness could say what happened to her between the 2 dates. The day after Annabelle's rescue, detectives from the Coconino County Sheriff's Department began checking remote settlements around North Rim. An internal report states that they decided to interview residents of forest homes within a few miles of the cave, believing it likely that someone local might have seen a stranger or heard suspicious noises in recent days. The first lead came from a call from a resident of the small community of Cougars Ridge, who reported that a man was acting strangely. She did not give her name, but described him as a recluse who lived in an old hunting cabin in the middle of a dense forest. She also noted that he hated tourists and often shouted threats at them when someone passed by his property. This report was recorded in the registry as potentially important. The man's name was Jack Grace, and according to his neighbors, he had been living in the woods for over a decade. One local, a farmer named Lawrence Brown, told detectives that Jack didn't like strangers and tracked people in the woods like animals. Another resident said he heard him say, under oath, "People who wander around here will get what they deserve." This record is attached as a reconstruction from the witness's words. Detectives went to the hunting cabin early that morning. The report noted that the house was one of those that look abandoned even when someone lives inside. The roof was half ruined, the doors were warped, and old traps were scattered around in disarray. However, smoke from the chimney indicated that the owner was at home. When the detectives entered, Jack did not resist at first, but spoke sharply and intermittently. According to one of the law enforcement officers, he looked at everyone with suspicion, as if everyone were a potential enemy. Since he was carrying a hunting knife, he was temporarily restricted in his movements, which was documented in the report as a precautionary measure. The real turning point came during the search of the building. In a small room, dozens of newspaper clippings lay on shelves, neatly arranged by date. They were about the disappearance of Annabelle Clark. The clippings were pasted into old magazines, some of them with underlines or notes in the margins. A direct quote from the detective's report: "For someone who had never met the victim, this obsession seemed excessive." A map of the area was found on the table. It was worn with several handwritten marks. One of the points, a small red cross in the northern part of the canyon, almost exactly matched the coordinates of the cave where Annabelle was found. Detectives photographed the map and seized it for further examination. This detail was the basis for Jack's immediate arrest, as stated in the official warrant. During the search, they also found an old metal box with a lock. Inside were meat knives, several rolls of rope, binoculars with cracked glass, and a notebook. The notebook was empty, but the pages appeared to have been torn out. Experts noted that this could indicate an attempt to get rid of the notes, although there is no direct confirmation of this. When Jack was taken out of the house, he did not say a word. According to the officer present at the arrest, the man just smiled to himself, which was recorded in the protocol as emotionally unstable behavior. Within a few hours, the information spread among journalists. The evening news in Arizona opened with a story about the arrest of a suspect in a high-profile disappearance case. TV channels showed footage of police carrying boxes out of the cabin, as well as a timeline of Annabelle's disappearance. The headlines read, "Case almost solved, and Coconino recluse is prime suspect." The prosecutor's office announced that Jack Grace had been preliminarily charged with suspicion of kidnapping and possible false imprisonment. His interrogation was postponed until the next morning, and the case itself was given priority status. The press created an aura around his name as a dangerous hunter who could have hidden a person in the mountains for years. In the evening of the same day, several neighbors gave additional testimony. One of them said that he saw Jack returning to the hut with a heavy backpack on a day close to the date of Annabelle's disappearance. Another claimed that he heard screams at night but was afraid to intervene. In the investigation report, these words are recorded as unverified but important for the picture of the suspect's behavior. That evening, major news portals announced, "This horror is finally over." For the public, Jack became a symbol of the case's resolution. For investigators, he was the key figure who seemed to have finally been found in the darkness of the Cochino forest. In the days following Jack Grace's high-profile arrest, the investigation seemed almost complete. The press called him the recluse who hid the secrets of the forest, and commentators confidently assumed that he was the very person who could have been holding Annabelle in an unknown location. However, within a few days, detectives received the first documents that contradicted the initial version. The investigation team's logbook contains a note made by a senior detective. Request to Phoenix Medical Facility. Priority. The reason was a short phrase that Grace uttered during the initial interrogation. According to the investigator, the man said, "I couldn't have been there when she disappeared. I was in the hospital at the time." The finality of his tone and the confidence in his voice prompted investigators to check this information, despite general skepticism. Within a few days, a response arrived from a private clinic on the outskirts of Phoenix. The administrative department confirmed that Jack had been hospitalized for several days during the period when Annabelle disappeared on the South Kaibeb Trail. The letter specified the exact dates of his stay, as well as the procedures he underwent. One of the nurses remembered the man and gave written testimony that he did not leave the ward because his condition required constant supervision. This testimony was added to the case file. Detectives requested additional confirmation. The clinic provided copies of internal logs signed by the doctors on duty, records of examinations, blood pressure measurements, and medication administration. One of the documents contained a handwritten note from the doctor. The patient is in satisfactory condition but cannot move independently. All records related to the period when Annabelle was being searched for. The investigation team conducted a separate check. They went to the clinic in person. The nurse on duty, who was interviewed, confirmed her signed statement and added that the man had calm, depressed behavior and never tried to leave the ward. Another employee recalled seeing him in the hallway only a few times during short trips to procedures. This completely ruled out his presence in the national park. After receiving these conclusions, investigators conducted a reanalysis of the items found in Grace's cabin. Newspaper clippings, which had previously been considered evidence of possible involvement, were now viewed from a different angle. Experts noted that the clippings contained articles not only about Annabelle, but also about other mysterious events in the canyon: disappearances, accidents, stories of lost tourists. This created an image of a person obsessed with the topic of unsolved stories. One of the experts noted, "The collection appears to be systematic, but has no logical connection to a specific victim." The map found on the table also received a new interpretation. It marked not only the cave area, but also other points, places associated with ancient rumors, places of legends about lost trails, old mines, abandoned shelters of cattle breeders. According to a forester who was interviewed separately, Grace often came to the tourist center and asked questions about mysterious areas in the canyon. The report stated, "He was probably studying the region, but had no criminal intent." Another important point arose during the examination of the neighbors' testimonies. One of the residents, who had previously stated that he heard screams coming from the hut, admitted that he could not actually name the exact date. The official report stated, "The witness is confusing the periods. It may be another incident or a conflict with wild animals." Another neighbor admitted that his statement about a heavy backpack on the day of the disappearance was an assumption because he did not keep track of the calendar and relied more on the weather than on specific days. When all the materials were cross-checked, the suspicion against Grace began to crumble. At the same time, the man's lawyer filed a motion for his release, pointing to the existence of a documented alibi. The prosecution was forced to agree. There was no evidence left in the case that could be used to prove his involvement in Annabelle's disappearance. A week after his arrest, Jack was officially released. The detective's report stated briefly, "Alibi confirmed, suspicions cleared." However, for the investigators, this meant much more. The probable criminal, whom they considered almost certain, was no longer part of the picture. All previous leads had fallen apart. After his release, Grace refused to talk to the press. One of the reporters waiting outside his cabin quoted the man as saying that he had no intention of participating in the circus and wanted everyone to be left alone. The detectives had no grounds to detain him and could not demand further explanations. The investigation was back to square one. At a staff meeting held a few days after his release, the lead detective noted, "The recluse theory has not been confirmed. All assumptions have been shaken. We have to start over." In the case files, this period is referred to as the week of decline, when the intensity of the investigation did not diminish, but the feeling of a lost trajectory became apparent. Disappointment prevailed not only in the investigation department. The press, which just a few days ago had been writing about the solved case, was forced to admit that the investigation had stalled. Viewers read the news with skepticism. Phrases such as hasty conclusions and false trail appeared in the headlines. The picture that had seemed clear fell apart into small details that had no solid foundation. The detectives were left with the same question they had started with. Who and under what circumstances could have taken Annabelle from a busy route, hidden her from everyone's eyes, and left her alive in a cave on the north edge 2 years later? When the investigators returned to their starting point, they decided to review everything that had been said and recorded in the days following Annabelle Clark's disappearance. A short note from the senior detective appeared in the official log. Begin reviewing initial testimony. Look for contradictions. It was with this line that a new phase of the investigation began. Quiet, analytical, but ultimately much more significant than the previous searches in the forest. First on the list was Melanie James, Annabelle's best friend. She was the last person to speak with her, the first to report her disappearance, and the one who stood by her hospital bed in the first hours after her rescue. She was present at every key point in the story, and that, according to one of the detectives, forced us to return to her words and check them again. During the initial interrogation 2 years ago, Melanie claimed that the phone call with Annabelle on the day of her disappearance lasted no more than a few minutes. She even gave an approximate duration, about 2 minutes according to her. The transcript of that conversation states, "The conversation is short, standard, without any particular details." When detectives requested the data from the telecommunications operator a second time, now after Annabelle's rescue, they received an official technical report that left no room for doubt. The call that Melanie called short actually lasted much longer. The documents state, connection time, about 18 minutes. This was the first significant discrepancy. The senior detective wrote in his report, "The friend underestimated the duration of the conversation by a factor of 9. An explanation is needed." Such distortions are rare. The difference between a few minutes and almost 20 is too stark to be attributed to a memory lapse. The second discrepancy was the information about Melanie's whereabouts on the day of Annabelle's disappearance. In her previous testimony, she stated that she had spent the entire morning and half of the afternoon at home in Flagstaff, without going anywhere. This statement was recorded without further questioning, as there was no reason to doubt it at the time. However, during a recheck of the data, detectives noticed a bank statement that came in response to a request for Melanie's financial activity that day. It was a standard request. At the time, 2 years ago, it was not analyzed thoroughly. Now, however, the document forced a change of mind. The statement recorded a purchase of gasoline at the Desert Star Fuels gas station, located on the highway that leads directly to the south and east entrances of the Grand Canyon. The exact time of the transaction was in the morning of the same day that Annabelle set out on the South Kaibab Trail. Melanie never mentioned this. Moreover, when asked if she had been in the canyon area that day, she replied, "No, I was at home the whole time." This fragment of the protocol was now underlined in red. The investigative analyst who worked with the bank documents left a short note in the report. The gas station is located about a 20-minute drive from where the victim's car was parked. The visit to the gas station occurred shortly before Annabelle's phone last registered on the network. Detectives requested additional information from the gas station owners. It turned out that the camera archives were not kept for long, and the recordings had been deleted 2 years ago. But an employee who worked at the station during that period recalled, "I remember a young woman who looked very tense. She didn't say anything specific, but she was in a hurry. The car was dark in color." This testimony was left as unconfirmed but relevant because no one could guarantee that it was Melanie. Now the investigators had 2 contradictions, significant enough to officially review her status in the case. During their analysis, detectives also reviewed old calls made to Melanie's number on the day Annabelle disappeared. According to the operator's technical data, between morning and noon, her phone was located near communication towers located a few miles from the road leading to the canyon. This completely contradicted her claim that she was at home. The official analytical report states, "Geolocation data shows movement in the direction of the canyon, which is inconsistent with the witness's previous statements." The detectives asked themselves, why did she hide this trip? Why did she lie about the length of the conversation? And why did she never mention that she was near the place where her friend disappeared? At that point, no one was jumping to conclusions. But according to protocol, any inconsistency in the testimony of a person connected to the victim must be investigated separately. The investigators decided to gather all documents related to Melanie, from her cell phone records to reports from the university where she was working at the time. During the reanalysis, detectives also noticed a detail that had previously been considered insignificant. In the first days after Annabelle's disappearance, it was Melanie who actively contacted the press, gave comments, and organized search parties. Her name often appeared in the news alongside photos of the missing woman. In the new report, the detective left a note. The level of involvement may correspond to the behavior of a friend, but it may also be an attempt to control the information space. This phrase became one of the most cautious formulations allowed in internal documents. However, the key element was the inconsistency in the duration of the last conversation. According to a telecommunications expert who was called in for a second time, a call of this duration usually means emotional stress or conflict. He noted in his report, 2 minutes is a short wish for success on the trip. 18 minutes is an important, intense conversation. And most importantly, no one ever heard the content of this conversation. All the details that Melanie shared about it were reconstructed from Melanie's own words. There was simply no other source. Over the course of several days, the analytical department compiled all this data into a single document. The final report stated, "Melanie James's behavior requires further investigation. Her testimony contains significant discrepancies with the objective data." This conclusion did not make her guilty, but it did one other thing. It raised a question mark where there had previously been certainty. And for the first time since Annabelle's rescue, detectives had a lead that was not tied to false findings, speculation, or tired witnesses. This lead pointed to a person who had been there all along, helping, crying at the hospital bedside. A person whose words no longer matched the facts. After discovering contradictions in Melanie's testimony, investigators decided to move from analyzing documents to real-time surveillance. An internal report states, Covert external surveillance of Emsa James is being carried out. The goal is to record the nature of her contacts and travel routes. The reason for this decision was that the sources of information about the day of Annabelle's disappearance were based almost entirely on Melanie's words. She was a key witness, but at the same time, she was the only one whose behavior began to raise doubts. During the first days of surveillance, detectives noticed a pattern that at first seemed coincidental. Melanie regularly drove to one of the neighborhoods in Flagstaff late in the evening. She parked her car in a remote parking lot near a group of residential buildings and stayed there for several hours. One of the detectives noted, "A male figure can be seen from the third-floor window. A woman enters the house without hesitation." The house belonged to Mark Caldwell, a young engineer who had been dating Annabelle for several years. He was the one who reported her disappearance along with Melanie and was actively involved in the search in the early days. No one had previously noticed that Mark and Melanie had been in such close contact since Annabelle's disappearance. But now this fact looked completely different. Over the next few days, surveillance confirmed that there had been meetings between them that they had both tried to hide. Mark left the house looking back. Melanie arrived at different times each time, avoiding repeating her route. A note appeared in the analytical department's official report. Contact between the individuals is maintained systematically and shows signs of a hidden personal relationship. The next step was to re-interview Annabelle's colleagues at the university. During one of these conversations, Suzanne Green, a professor in the geology department, recalled a detail that had seemed insignificant 2 years earlier. She said that shortly before Annabelle's disappearance, she had noticed tension in the relationship between the two women. According to Green, Melanie reacted too emotionally to any mention of Mark and seemed jealous of him and Annabelle. This testimony was recorded in the minutes with a note saying, "Possible motive." Another university employee reported that Melanie had repeatedly complained of injustice when Mark began dating Annabelle. He relayed Melanie's words as recorded by the witness. "I was the first one to support him, and she just showed up and took him away." This statement, although not documented, became an important part of the psychological portrait. The turning point came when investigators accidentally gained access to a box of Melanie's old belongings, which she had donated to the university archives a few months earlier. Her belongings were being reviewed as part of another internal case related to administrative audits. According to the rules, access to them was only permitted with her written consent, which she had given at the time and had not revoked. In the box, among handwritten notes, advertising brochures, and old planners, lay a small softcover notebook. There were no markings on it. Only when the archive employee flipped through a few pages did it become clear that it was a personal diary. The pages inside were covered with uneven handwriting in places excessively pressed, the way people write when they are in a state of intense emotional stress. The archivist reported the find to university security, who in turn notified the investigators. Looking through the diary, the detectives found entries that clearly showed Melanie's obsession with Mark. The pages contained phrases such as, "She stole him from me," "He was mine before they even met," "I won't let them be happy." In many entries, Annabelle's name was accompanied by harsh descriptions. "Fake," "Took what belonged to me," "I want her to disappear." One page was entirely devoted to the day Mark officially told his friends that he was dating Annabelle. It contained lines written so forcefully that the ballpoint pen tore through the page. "I will never forgive this. Never." Investigators noted that the entries covered a period long before Annabelle's disappearance and continued for several months after it. They did not contain direct references to any actions that could be classified as a crime, but they characterized deep emotional instability and obsessive hatred. The analytical conclusion drawn after studying the diary contained the line, "The emotional entries do not prove direct involvement, but they demonstrate a clear motive of jealousy and envy, which requires further investigation." Meanwhile, external surveillance continued. Melanie and Mark met regularly. Their routes did not coincide with the meeting place. They arrived separately at different times and left by different roads. They acted as if they did not want to be seen together. According to one of the detectives conducting the surveillance, they spoke little, but their closeness was unmistakable. Another important element was the testimony of Melanie's former classmate, who recalled an incident that occurred about a year before Annabelle's disappearance. She said that Melanie complained of a sense of injustice and said that life always chooses the wrong person. In the official report, this explanation is recorded under the heading, Emotional Reaction, Possible Sign of Future Conflict. Over the course of several weeks, the collected material began to form a new trajectory for the investigation. At the center of this trajectory was not a recluse from the mountains, not a random witness, not a stranger, but a person who had played the role of a close friend from the beginning, and at the same time kept a hidden life that no one knew about. The investigators had not yet reached any conclusions, but at a staff meeting at the end of the week, the lead detective uttered a phrase that the stenographer recorded in the minutes. "We can no longer consider Melanie a neutral party. She has a motive, she has hidden contacts, and she has made false statements. We need to dig deeper." After several weeks of observation, analysis, and quiet evidence gathering, the investigation team decided to move on to the next stage, the official interrogation of Melanie James. The official log states, "The goal is to compare the witness's testimony with verified technical and documentary data, assess reactions, identify discrepancies." The interrogation was conducted in a small room at the sheriff's office without press cameras or outsiders. According to internal protocol, 2 detectives and a stenographer were present in the room. Melanie appeared voluntarily, although, according to one of the officers, she looked tense, overly composed, as if she were running through pre-prepared answers in her head. The detective started with simple questions, repeating those she had already heard 2 years ago. Their tone was neutral. Melanie answered confidently, only occasionally glancing at the door. For the first few minutes, everything went the same as during the old interrogations, the same intonations, the same statements. However, this time the detectives had a different approach. They were not working on the number of answers. They were working on reactions. The first detail presented was the geolocation data from her phone. The interrogation record includes the detective's words. "Your phone was in the coverage area of the cell tower that serves the road leading to the canyon that morning." Melanie replied that couldn't be true because she was at home. However, the detectives placed a printout on the table, a long strip of paper with technical maps of coverage areas. The transcript states, "The witness fell silent, looked at the printout, denied it several times, and changed her posture, crossing her arms." Then they showed her another document, a bank statement with a transaction from the last diner gas station highlighted in blue marker. Melanie said she didn't remember that trip. The detective clarified, "The gas station is located less than 30 minutes from the place where your friend disappeared from mobile signal radars." She was silent again. The second step was to refer to the testimony of a waiter from a cafe located next to the road leading to the canyon. The waiter stated that he saw 2 young women, one with dark hair, the other with light hair, who got into a dark-colored car together. The investigator recorded the following phrase in the protocol. The witness reacted with nervous laughter and said she didn't know who he was talking about. Then the detective slowly took a small soft-cover notebook from the table. It was the one found in the university archives, Melanie's diary. The transcript states, "The witness turned pale, her hands trembled, her gaze became fixed." The detectives opened several pages containing entries about Mark, jealousy, phrases about a stolen life, and betrayed trust. All of this was read aloud. After a few seconds of silence, Melanie said that the diary is just emotions, but her voice cracked. At that moment, the detectives changed their tactics. One of them read out a reconstruction of the waiter's words. The dark-haired girl said she could give her friend a ride to the start of the route. They got into the car together. And then, for the first time during the entire interrogation, Melanie reacted too sharply. She said that she didn't take her that morning, but her words sounded rushed. The detective noted in the protocol, "The denial is uncertain. The intonation is changed." When she was shown the operator's technical report with the actual duration of the call, not a few minutes, but much longer, Melanie lowered her head. According to the stenographer, she was silent longer than the pause in the interrogation allowed. After that, the detective took the final step. He showed her a photo of the old Red Rock quarry taken by the Parks Department. The photo was not directly related to the interrogation, but according to geolocation data, her phone signal was recorded near this area on that day. At that moment, the internal surveillance camera recorded Melanie closing her eyes, touching her forehead, and whispering something indistinct. After that, according to protocol, she asked for water, and when the detectives returned to the table, her behavior changed. Her voice became shaky, her words fragmented. She said a phrase that was recorded verbatim in the transcript. "I didn't want this. I just wanted her to listen to me." The detectives did not ask direct questions. They let her continue. Melanie admitted that she had indeed given Annabelle a ride that morning. According to her, she said she wanted to talk, that it was the last chance to restore their friendship. Annabelle allegedly agreed, but instead of driving to the start of the route, Melanie turned toward an abandoned area near the Red Rock quarry. According to Melanie herself, she wanted to explain how painful it was to watch their relationship with Mark. The transcript states, "The witness began to cry and repeated several times that she had no intention of causing harm." Then her words became fragmented. She said that an argument broke out between them. Melanie's voice rose, and the transcript records the phrase, "She said I should move on, and I couldn't." Melanie then described the blow. She could not say exactly what she had used to strike her, only repeating that she didn't plan to do so. According to her, Annabelle lost consciousness after the blow. She admitted that she took her to the basement of her aunt's house, which had been abandoned after the move. In the report, the detective made a note. The witness claims that she planned to release the victim later. Melanie claims that she kept Annabelle there in the dark, tied to a support with a rope. She said several times that she was afraid that she would tell Mark everything. Then, when the search began in the area and there was a threat that someone might come across the house, Melanie moved Annabelle to a cave on the northern edge. The transcript states that she described it as a temporary hiding place. The detective's report emphasizes, "The witness was unable to explain why she did not tell anyone about her condition and why she did not seek help." Melanie spoke faster and faster, as if she was afraid that if she stopped, she would not be able to continue. The detectives did not prompt her or press her with questions, they just recorded her statements. When asked to clarify her motive, Melanie said only one thing: "I wanted her to finally understand how I had suffered." In the detective's log, this stage of the interrogation is briefly noted. The witness broke down. A confession was given. After a lengthy investigation, the prosecution officially charged Melanie James with kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. The trial began in Flagstaff in the county courthouse, a building familiar to every local resident. The case received widespread attention. Newspapers wrote about the dark side of friendship, and television channels showed archival photos of two smiling students who, just a few years ago, had appeared together in university projects. On the first day of the hearings, the corridors were crowded. Lawyers, journalists, relatives, ordinary observers. Everyone wanted to see the woman who, until recently, had been considered an exemplary friend. Melanie entered the courtroom calmly, without lowering her eyes, without any signs of remorse. According to a reporter who was in the room, her gaze was frozen and firm, as if she had convinced herself of the correctness of every step she had taken. She sat upright in the dock, her hands folded, occasionally glancing at the judge, but never at Annabelle. The prosecution presented the court with a detailed description of her actions based on technical data, diary entries, witness statements, and her own confession. The whole picture looked cold and calculated, from the moment Melanie picked up Annabelle on the highway to her prolonged detention in the dark basement of her aunt's house, and then in a remote cave where the victim was found. In his opening statement, the prosecutor called Melanie's actions emotional abuse that went beyond human limits. This sentence was recorded verbatim by journalists. However, the most anticipated moment was the day when Annabelle herself would testify in court. Doctors allowed her to participate only after several weeks of rehabilitation, noting that her mental state was fragile and required careful handling. She entered the courtroom slowly, leaning on a nurse, but her gaze was clear, the kind of gaze that people who have survived darkness and returned from it have. Annabelle gave her testimony without looking at Melanie. The transcript notes that she spoke quietly, but every word was clear. She talked about the first blow, the cold concrete floor of the basement, how the days lost their shape and became a uniform stream of darkness. According to her, Melanie brought her water and food irregularly, sometimes disappearing for long periods, sometimes saying phrases that were reconstructed from Annabelle's own words. "I want you to understand." Importantly, the victim emphasized that Melanie never apologized, never showed remorse, only anger and resentment. The doctors who examined Annabelle in the first hours after her rescue testified as witnesses. They noted that the woman's condition corresponded to prolonged mental and physical exhaustion. A psychologist who had met with her several times gave the following description in court. The patient was subjected to systematic emotional pressure aimed at isolation and control. When it was the prosecution's turn to call witnesses, Mark Caldwell was invited to the stand. He did not look at Melanie and answered briefly. The transcript states that he only learned of their secret meetings after the arrest, and his reaction was described as shock and disgust. The defense tried to build a case on the assertion that Melanie broke down emotionally, acted out of character, and that her life was ruined by internal turmoil. However, a forensic psychiatric examination determined that Melanie was sane. She understood her actions, made conscious decisions, planned her steps, and concealed them. At one stage of the hearing, the judge asked Melanie if she wanted to say anything in her defense. Witnesses present in the courtroom relayed her response. "I did not do anything that I had no right to do." No remorse, no admission of guilt. The emotions in the courtroom were tense. Several people in the audience began to cry as Annabelle finished her speech. She talked about what hurt the most, that her captivity lasted not only in the basement and cave, but also in her mind, because all this time she could not understand why the person she trusted had turned her life into an endless night. She said that not a day went by when she didn't think that Melanie would come to her senses, realize what she was doing, and bring her home. This reconstruction of the victim's words was entered into the record as a personal emotional description of the experience. After the questioning was completed, the judge announced the verdict. Melanie James was found guilty on all counts. When the judge read out the sentence, Melanie showed no reaction. She sat motionless, her profile stretched out, as if listening to something she had known by heart for a long time. The case was declared closed. For the judicial system, it was another completed trial. For Annabelle, it was only part of a long journey that did not end with the verdict. According to one of the doctors who worked with her after the trial, the greatest burden for Annabelle was not physical or psychological exhaustion, but the fact that she had been broken by the person she considered most dear to her. She often repeated that a guest in the house can betray you, but a friend has no right to. And it was this thought, as noted in her medical report, that became more painful for her than all the wounds inflicted during her captivity.